When I first discovered that I had femoroacetabular impingement, or FAI, basically hip impingement, it actually didn't manifest for me in my hip initially. It actually manifested in my low back and my SI joint. So I want to talk to you today about if you have hip impingement or FAI, how does that cause sacroiliac SI joint dysfunction, and then what can you do about it? So here's the basic principle. Whenever a joint in your body, your hip or your knee or your ankle or your shoulder or anything, whenever it doesn't have enough range of motion, the joint either above it or below it compensates and moves more than it should. So not moving enough moves more than it should. That's, in a nutshell, why your SI joint gets flared up. Even if you don't notice that there's that much of a difference in your hip, if you really checked out all of the angles and all of the internal rotation, external rotation, flexion, extension, adduction, abduction, in and out, all of the different ranges, you probably would start to discover, oh, there is a restriction in the hip. Whenever there's a restriction, at some point during functional movement, say like a squat or something like that, you, on a subtle level, avoid the tightness. So for me, I would go and do a squat. I would go sink into the squat, and instead of being able to sink into this hip, I would hike away from it. So my low back would kind of hike to avoid what I didn't have in the hip. And that's why my sacroiliac joint kept getting injured. So if you're finding that one side of your low back keeps getting injured, I would look immediately downstream to the next major joint, the hip, and figure out which parts are most restricted. Now, I can't give you what exercises are always the thing that fixes that, because frankly, every part of your joint can restrict hip flexion or internal rotation or external rotation. There's so many variables. That's why we have an entire program with like 50 plus exercises devoted to the hips. But just know that if you've been told you have FAI, or you experience front hip pain or hip impingement, or you're just having pain in your low back, don't think that it's always where the pain is that's the problem, the real source of the problem. Sometimes it's a little downstream in the hip. So check out your hip range of motion, start getting to work on your hip flexibility, and you might find that that recurring SI joint pain starts to alleviate, starts to disappear. So hope that helps.